Welcome to Season 4 of the Changing Earth podcast with Sarah F. Hathaway, blending survival fiction and fact to bring you entertaining education that will help you dream, survive, and thrive. And now, here's your host, Sarah F. Hathaway.
Hello and welcome to the Changing Earth podcast. This is episode number 155, Season 4, Episode 31. So today I want to bust right into the podcast because I have a lengthy interview after. It's going to be a long podcast episode, but I've often heard that you guys would love to have the information rather than not have it. So I have a great interview for you after the show with Sam Bradley, and we're talking about if there was wide-scale natural disasters, kind of like we had last year with all the different hurricanes and wildfires and things like that, that was hitting the country in rapid succession. How would we handle the refugee situation? So Sam was part of Katrina, so she's got some really good inside information on what exactly would be the response to this type of situation. So I'm excited to bring you that. I've just been, building my farm. I had a whole new litter of ducks, so we got them moved, stuff like that. Just been training jiu-jitsu and taekwondo and staying ready, staying prepared, staying strong. Hopefully you are too. That is my message. Stay physically fit because you never know what will happen next, and what is the primary thing you need when something happens is your body. So take care of it, do it right, and get out there and stay fit. So last week there was this ongoing disagreement that's begun between Earl and his feelings about Erica and Vince's role in the resistance, and then what Vince and Erica are doing. So that's an argument that's going to be kind of ongoing. And so this week, Erica goes and explores the refugee camp with Daniel. And it's just kind of a chapter of fun, good times. But the reality is these things would have to be set up. So like I said, I've got a lengthy interview with Sam Bradley on how that would kind of look in this type of situation. So I can't wait to get that to you. Just a real quick reminder, I want to remind you that you can go ahead and become a subscriber to the podcast and a supporter of the podcast by going to www.patreon.com/Changing Earth. That's www.patreon.com/Changing Earth. So without any further ado, let's go ahead and jump right into Chapter 31 of Battle for the South. Chapter 31. After one very emotional afternoon, the family had a delightful evening together. They ate dinner and Daniel suggested they play a game of Uno together. Erica laughed at him as he proudly displayed the cards he had remembered to pack. Everyone joined in, and even Megan was smiling as they teased one another with skips and draw twos. Playing long into the night, Erica wished this evening together would never end. But there were people missing. She was determined to get them out of Las Vegas. The next morning, Erica went exploring with Daniel. It was hot on the streets, and it took a massive coordinated effort to keep the community functioning. Food was being transported in from the north. Colonel Andre Ward made a deal with the Canadian government to receive aid. The Canadians were fearful that with all the land the U.S. was losing, the feds might start thinking about expansion once they had the resistance taken out. Waste management was a big issue as well. Most of the sewer systems for the city of Reno was destroyed in the Great Quake and never rebuilt. They had started digging privies in the beginning, but as more and more people poured in, they were filling up too quickly. They started directing the waste out over the edge of a canyon. It was a horrible sight, but the whole setup was very temporary, and they were focused on leaving. Water was the other issue that required constant attention. They did have a dozen wells being powered by solar and gasifiers, but there were no pipes to move the water about. Usually they set up a wash tent near the well. Citizens would travel there to wash and collect water for personal use. There were also massive laundry tents hooked up to the water supply. The residents could come by to wash their clothing, and a group of workers washed clothes for the soldiers. Daniel chatted aimlessly as they walked. He was excited to show Erica everything. Taking her toward a soccer field, they saw Corporal Smith out practicing. "Is this your other boy?" Smith asked. "Sure is, Corporal Smith. This is my little man, Daniel," Erica said, introducing him. "Not so little anymore, Mom. I'm turning 11 this year," Daniel chimed in. You know how to play, big man? Smith asked, popping the ball off his knee. You bet, he said jovially. Can we, Mom? You can, buddy, but your mom has had a rough few weeks. I think I'll sit this one out, Erica answered him honestly. Oh, come on, Mom, please, Daniel begged. Really, Danny, I'm sore, Erica told him. All right, he acquiesced, slowly heading out onto the field with his head bowed. Erica watched him, and her heart ached. Oh, what the hell, she told herself. Come on, Daniel, let's go, she yelled, running by him. Hooray, Mom's playing, Daniel shouted as Smith kicked the ball to him. Eventually, Vince, Dexter, Star, Johnny, and Megan came looking for them. They found them laughing and running on the field. Come on, guys, Dexter yelled, jogging out to join them. Trucker was barking and spinning by his side. The family played together late into the afternoon. When the sun began to set, they had to call it quits. If they didn't get over to the food tent, there wouldn't be anything left. They took a shortcut home which led them in the opposite direction from which they had come. The road passed by the militia training grounds, and First Sergeant Bennett was returning from dinner. Hey, Danny, Bennett said as they approached. I told you I'd get them back, didn't I? You sure did, sir, the boy admitted, and thought for a minute. But I'm still mad you didn't take me with you. Sounds like your grandma is glad I didn't take you, Bennett responded. Yeah, he paused. I guess you're right. You know I am. High five, buddy. You did a great job, Bennett told him, giving him a high five. Looks like you guys have been out working up a sweat, he commented to the adults. Sure have, sir, Smith replied eagerly. Good, you'll all be ready for tomorrow. I'll see you at 0500 right here, Bennett said cheerfully. He was back in his element. See you in the morning, Erica answered. And guys, it's really good to see you all back together, Bennett added. It's good to be back together, Vince told him. Good night, sir. Night, Vince, Bennett responded. What's he talking about, Mom? Daniel asked. We're training to get Grandma and Greg and Penny's family out of Las Vegas, along with some important mercenary soldiers. We start tomorrow, Erica admitted. He thought carefully about her words. Are you getting Carmen and Crystal too? He wondered. Yes, we are, Vince answered. Can I come? He asked. No, Danny, Erica answered. We need someone to stay and protect Grandma and Grandpa and Megan, Vince told him. Don't worry, little dude. I'll be here too, Johnny assured him. We're not leaving you, Erica told him. We're training right here, and when we go to Vegas, we'll only be gone a day or so. Then we'll be right back with Carmen and Crystal. If all goes well, he said. But what if it doesn't? Nobody has an answer for that, Danny. Anything could happen to any one of us any time. Tomorrow is never a guarantee. That's why we have to make every moment together count, Erica explained, hugging him tightly, which turned into another big family hug. They headed to the food tent and ate some dinner before retiring to the family tent. Kay was sore at Erica for not relaxing with her injuries. She knew Erica would start training tomorrow, and then she would be pushing it even more. Kay couldn't understand why she couldn't take a few more days to heal. Earl sat quietly, clearly upset that they intended on going through with this plan. He looked at Erica's arm and confirmed that the infection was clearing up. He washed it and told her that the stitches needed to stay in for at least another 4 days. Erica would just have to take it easy. So this day of fun at the refugee camp precedes the next round of training. And caring for large groups of refugees is going to be a very big challenge when we're faced with large amounts from any number of natural disasters that could take place. If it were to hit multiple areas at once, we're going to have some major concerns. So that's what we're talking about today with Sam. Sam is a fire and EMS educator. She is a MS EMTP, has been in EMS for over 38 years as a paramedic, clinical and educator services coordinator, and ambulance company paramedic field supervisor. She's also spent many years as an EMS educator. Sam currently works as a QI consultant and EMS educator for fire departments and communication centers. A prolific writer, she does freelance work for EMS-related journals, online publications, and textbook publishers. Sam has published a number of fiction stories and is very involved in social media and blogging. Following her passion for disaster EMS, she is the training officer for the Federal Disaster Medical Assistance Team, DMAT CA-6. She also dabbles in photography and videography. She is currently residing in Colorado and spends her time working on EMS, CE content, and writing EMS textbooks and novels. She co-hosts a popular weekly podcast that is in its 5th year. She loves dogs and banana cream pie. You can get a hold of Sam at www.disasterpodcast.com. That's www.disasterpodcast.com. So let's go ahead and welcome Sam to the show. Today, I am honored to have Sam Bradley back on the show. Hi, Sam. Thank you very much for coming back on the podcast this season. I really appreciate it.
Anytime, Sarah. It's always fun with you.
Well, you know, I had this episode that we're doing today. The characters in my book are spending a little bit of downtime in a refugee camp. And this camp is a little bit different than what the Vegas one was. It's more of an organic camp and not so much of a government institution, basically. So it's a whole bunch of refugees that are together, just kind of making their own way. So I wanted to sit down and really explore the concept of these refugee camps. We know we have them right now in the world, and it might be a possibility if we had some serious disasters that struck in more than one area of the United States all at once kind of thing. So I wanted to explore it with you, and I thought you were the perfect person to talk to about these. What an operation it is to take care of that many people in that kind of isolated setting.
Well, and that's the thing, too. I mean, you're looking at a bunch of different scenarios. I remember when my team, back in whatever year it was taking care of some of the Syrian refugees that came over originally. And then there's disaster refugees that generally, don't have to fend for themselves, which is kind of on the downside, really. And then there's just so many different levels, and depending on where they are, would determine how much support that they get, and there's just a lot of variables in there. So when we're talking about this, it could, I tend to lean more in toward the disaster scenario, but it could be a lot of things.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's start with food, because that's pretty darn important, food and water. We'll do water next, though. But let's start with some food. What do you see as potential areas of food procurement when we're caring for these huge groups of refugees? How can we get that much food that fast?
Well, it's funny because you and I were just chatting about gardens and canning and such. So that may not be available to refugees. And another thing, too, is how long are they going to be there? If this is just a disaster relief thing, it's pretty short term. And, of course, in this country, we've got, American Red Cross and other folks that are going to come out and assist, and DMATs, which is what I do, Disaster Medical Assistance Team. So there are resources in our country. But on a longer term thing where they're going to be there for a while, it's not an immediate fix, and we'll talk about that, but, could they have farming patches where they can produce their own vegetables and even, have garlics and spices to enhance the flavor of the food they make if it's not all that good, not all that tasty, but it also helps psychologically, if they're getting MREs every day, they're better than they used to be, but not fun.
Yeah.
That's why they always put the little hot sauce thing in there.
Right.
Letting them participate in their own raising of plants and so forth it's good for them psychologically too. But it doesn't always work because either they don't have the land or they don't have enough rainfall, depending on where they are. But on a more immediate basis, again, depending on where you are, we, of course, in the U.S. have a lot of resources, a lot of organizations that would go out and help. I actually found an interesting website from foodkind.org. And this is a bunch of unpaid volunteers. They cover all their own costs. They go into a disaster relief camp or whatever it might be, refugees of all kinds, and they find out what they really need. And I think they said abundantly, predominantly, it's fresh food, it's produce, and so forth. Yeah. So they find out what their nutritional needs are, what they really want, and then they kind of determine the type, quantity, and food that they're going to get, and they have their own different places where they procure it. And they also team up with the local community to find food banks or whatever they can find to get the food. And, it also has the psychological aspect of letting them know you're not forgotten. There are people who care, and we're going to do our best to help you out. So that's a big part of it, is moral support. They get, like Red Cross is a good organization to supply clothing and that kind of thing. And one of the things they said was the mission's focus is not only on the distribution of food, but on the human-to-human interactions which bring relief and dignity to those in crisis. And I really kind of like that phrase. But, who pays for this stuff? Well, fortunately, in this world of crowdfunding, you put something up that has a humanitarian need, and people are going to jump on that. They also will get, ask for donations off their website. So, again, depending on where you are, it depends on how much they can get and the type of food they can get.
It always makes me laugh because the worldwide image is sometimes projected that Americans are just greedy. Greedy people, greedy, rude people, right? But actually, Americans pay more money in charity by will than we do in taxes by force. So, we're one of the most charitable nations in the whole world. So I think we got kind of a bad rap there, and a lot of people do step up to the plate when they see others in need, especially when it's within our own country.
Yes, thank you for that. We appreciate the good word and listen to that, people. It's important. But back in 2007 in California, we had that whole rash of fires in San Diego, and of course it wasn't the first, it wasn't the last. But actually, we were down there doing a drill and ended up getting, deployed to these fires as part of the medical team. But in 2007 in San Diego, the fires were so bad that so many people had to evacuate. There was not enough places, because most towns and cities will have a pre-planned area for people to go in the event of an evacuation. Well, this involved horses, it involved just lots of animals and that kind of thing. And there wasn't enough space. And they have I think of the name of it now, but they had a big venue down there, Del Mar Raceway. They never intended it to be a disaster evacuation site because it was below sea level, but a lot of people ended up there. And so they really had to get creative on how to make that a functional shelter. But as well, there were all these little ad hoc groups that were kind of creating their own little communities along the way. Well, I was a state employee at the time, having just created the disaster team for the state, and this was the first use of said disaster team. We wanted to go evaluate these different sites and make sure they had what they needed in terms of shelter and food and sanitation, and we'll talk about all of that. But they had someone from each department to make their own evaluation. They had medical folks, they had sanitation folks. All of that, and to make assessments of all of these huge areas that were just popping up all over the place. So part of this is somebody needs to make an assessment of these refugee camps, or whatever you want to call them, to figure out what their needs are. Or is there a better place they can go? But food, of course, is the big one. But I think in this country, farmers that have extra crops, food banks, that kind of thing.
Right, even just the amount of waste that we throw out because it's not pretty for the shelf, right? Yeah, that could be shipped in.
You think they care about whether the can's dented? I doubt it, as long as there's food in it.
Or your carrot isn't perfectly carrot-shaped. No, as long as it tastes like a carrot and it's fresh, bring it on, right?
Yeah, and the fresh fruit's a big deal. We don't think about, rickets and that kind of thing in this day and age. But, if people don't have fruit in the long term, that's going to be a problem.
Eating just canned food gets old.
Not only old, but maybe it isn't giving you the nutritional balance you need to function.
Fair enough, and it has the high sodium content and everything, so you could be like ODing on sodium at that point.
Well, and you think about people that are sensitive to sodium and have high blood pressure and that kind of thing. That's just makes a bad situation worse medically. So,
yeah. So this is going into imagination land a little bit. What do you think would happen if we had like hurricanes on, Florida, the East Coast, the West Coast gets hit with fires, we're kind of droughted out. What if we had like the environmental disaster kind of impacting the entire country? Do you think it would go into like a straight triage at that point, like who needs it worse, and that's where we're going to send it? Or, in my book, I have them kind of writing off certain areas because they just couldn't send help everywhere all at once, so I'm just kind of curious, because you're in the government agencies and stuff, how you kind of see that. How do you think that would kind of play out?
Well, I also live in imagination land, so, that works. Well, the first thing I consider is, again, going back to the idea of the feds evaluating the situation and maybe finding, and that's, again, rather similar to what we're talking about in the 2007 fires, is finding these smaller groups, bringing them into one large shelter that they can, assure that those people are going to get their needs met, because you're not going to find all these folks. They're pretty, especially the communications are probably, they're kind of going to be on their own. So the only way you can really, but you're talking like tornadoes, hurricanes, earthquakes, everything happening at once.
Right.
A lot of people are, it's just like the general disaster thing where people always think, oh, well, I'll just call 911. No, people, it doesn't work that way. If 911 even works, which it may not, you have fire stations that are going to have their own issues in terms of personnel or wrecked equipment, or the door won't open. And obviously too much need to, and they're not going to go out in the middle of a raging hurricane.
Right, and they have their own families to worry about.
Well, yeah. And one of the things we do on the Disaster Podcast is really try to reinforce with first responders to have their family plans set, so they are less likely to leave work to run home and make sure everything's there. But that's a little bit of an aside. But a lot of these, it just reinforces the fact you're going to be on your own at least 72 hours. So you're just going to have to plan for that. If after an earthquake, if you can't stay in your house, make sure you have a tent you can put in the backyard. I mean, people have to think for themselves on this kind of thing. So there will be a lot of people that are prepared and way more that aren't. So, like I said, the best thing to do is probably find these little clutches of people and bring them into a larger area that can be monitored, and that the needs can be met a lot easier. And that's a really interesting scenario. That's some thought. Yeah, because
we almost had it last year. We almost had it.
We did have it.
Yeah, with the hurricanes that were going on and all the fires that were going on out here.
You're
California
right.
is still all stirred up from what happened last year, because so many people needed storage, new housing, all kinds of stuff.
Oh, yeah. And, then after the fires, where there's no vegetation, you get mudslides.
Yep.
And then when the vegetation grows back up, then you got the fires again. So it's like a never-ending battle.
Right.
In California.
And I'm not in the hurricane areas, but I assume it's not an instant rebuild. I'm sure they're still working on trying to repair. And
it takes forever. There's areas that are still trying to recover from Katrina that just never got built back up. And having worked those hurricanes, there were so many people that were displaced. Right where we stayed during Hurricane Harvey, there was a huge venue that's normally a expo of some kind that was housing people. I mean, it was humongous. But the larger, we'll talk about it later too, but the larger the place is, with the more people, the more security issues you have, and just all kinds of other stuff. So it's a balance you got to find.
Right, yeah, that's what I was thinking. I'm like, I don't want to go into those bigger areas with all those people under lock and key. I'm all set. Thanks. I'm going up into the mountains to camp for a while.
We think that way, but not everybody does. All those people that haven't thought about it, or they are totally unprepared, or they have their head in the sand. Oh, this doesn't happen to me. It happens to everybody else. Well, surprise people, Go into imagination land. And I don't think there's a place in the country that doesn't have some kind of disaster looming somewhere. So, and I'm going to mention this because it seems relevant, is have a family disaster plan.
Mm-hmm.
Let your kids be a part of that. Okay, we're going to assume in Imagination Land that there is no internet. Oh my God. Okay, well,
yeah.
we probably also don't have cell service. What communication are we going to have? Do we have little FRS radios and communicate with each other? Where are we going to meet, after a disaster? Yep. Where is our disaster supplies? I tell you what, yesterday with these storms coming through Colorado, I was, I had fortunately just gone through my disaster kit recently and thinking, okay, what do I need to take down there? Batteries, yada, yada, yada. Well, if you have nothing, that's not the time to start.
Right, but exactly. You've seen the stores around those times.
Oh, yeah. And, have extra food because the stores are going to get wiped when they know that there's a hurricane coming or something because everybody does this at the last minute.
Let's go into water. How are we going, we've created this camp now for these people. If we don't have access to a public water facility, it's been damaged or whatever, how are we going to filter this much water? We can't give everybody life straws. What are we going to do here?
Well, the importance of this can't be overstated because without clean water, you have diarrhea and cholera and all kinds of bad things.
No sanitation.
Oh, yeah, and we'll talk about that too. But, that's even been a problem for our federal disaster teams. You give one person with the runs and pretty much the entire team goes down. We're dysfunctional. We can't help anybody. Yeah. We're all blowing out all over the place. That's a pretty picture, isn't it? But we, of course, have, like you say, life straws and other things available to us that these evacuees may not.
Right.
But even something as simple, if we don't have contaminated water, just transferring the water between one vessel and the other, people tend to put their hands in there, touch the inside of water containers. Their hands may be contaminated. So it just creates the problem. In fact, some public health initiatives have focused on the improved bucket that has a lid on it that, you can't put your hands in there. So things like that. Having water for purification tablets is pretty critical until you can get a good clean water source. I think the biggest thing is education on keeping the water clean. There may be a situation where there is no flowing water. So what do you have in terms of water availability? Now, in some areas in this country, people would just truck out, trucks full of bottled water if that's available, but that isn't always available,
right,
depending on the area. And God, I was reading something, I can't remember which site it was, but it said something about the average person needs 30 liters of water a day. What? I couldn't drink 30 liters of water in a month, but, that's...
Right. Are they talking about maybe for washing and stuff like that? Clean clothes and clean body as well?
Right. That's taking that into consideration. By the way, there's a disaster. Fill your bathtub. It's not water you're going to want to drink, but you at least can bathe and wash dishes in it, just saying. So, yeah, that's a big problem. They do have really large water filters, but that probably isn't going to happen immediately. They have to get those out and set up, and they have to have a water source coming into them. So that's a really big deal. Once they get set up,
you can do rain capture, but you're only going to get so much off of like a rain capture. And if there's rain, like we don't have rain out here all summer long.
Well, not to Colorado. We've got plenty of it right now. But, you're thinking in a worst case scenario where water taps are far away. Kids have to leave school to go and collect water that's a quarter mile away or something. So all of that are considerations. So one would hope that the local community that's supporting this shelter, be it Americans or refugees from somewhere else, need to figure that out ahead of time. What happens if we have a whole lot of people and it's the middle of summer? How are we going to get water out to them that's safe and clean? And obviously bottled water is not going to work for the long term.
Indefinitely.
Yeah.
Right.
First of all, it's
short
expensive.
term, great. We can bring in a bunch of bottles, but in a long-term scenario where you have people out there for a year to 2 years, I mean, that's not going to be sustainable.
Exactly. So, it's something that all the local emergency management folks need to take into consideration. What if we do have a big area of people that's going to be there for a while? How are we going to support that? Because, of course, water is the most important thing, followed by food.
And we kind of had that situation in Flint just a couple years back with their whole lead in the water, right? Uh-huh.
I was raised right by there.
Me too.
Yeah, that's right. We talked about that. It's hard to conceive that a normal Midwestern town could have that level of contamination, but it happened.
Right?
Yeah.
And it was a long-term thing. They were living off bottled water for a while and transported in water. And
did it ever get?
I don't even.
It's completely.
I don't even know.
I don't think it has. I hear things every once in a while.
Yeah. Water is going to be the name of the game in the future. Let's talk about hygiene, because hygiene is so important, so overlooked in a lot of cases. How are we going to ensure that hygiene is met?
Well, and it totally relates to the water problem. If you're contaminating the water with people's hands, even though the water may be good when it comes in, all of those kinds of things. Probably the singular most important thing is education and having, because I remember a lot of the deployments we're on, we're set up in a different city. We have, of course, the training. We also have hand washing stations. So those are critical. And making sure people realize maybe they weren't raised to wash their hands after they go to the bathroom. But
you
need to teach them why it's so important, because you can cross-contaminate food or water, and then all
I love that. Yeah. I love that they put those outside of porta potties now. It was always right?
The DMATers would be very unhappy if they didn't have that. So, we always make sure that's supplied. But, the supplies have to come from somewhere. So, again, that's part of the pre-planning the community should be looking at. Things like mosquito nets. I know when the team went to Haiti, their disaster supplies didn't show up until after they did. So they spent the first night sleeping on the ground in post-earthquake Haiti. And, mosquitoes can be up to and including lethal. And so those that had mosquito nets, people were willing to buy them for $100. That's basic. You have an area with mosquitoes, that simple thing could even save your life. Making sure the housing is safe. I was reading things about, water leakage into the house, and that creates a mosquito problem. And all these things kind of build on each other.
Like the black molds and that.
Oh, yes, for real. And a lot of people don't understand how dangerous those things can be. So, educating folks and trying to get them to understand the importance of the hygiene that they can provide for themselves. Maybe having other people within that community monitor what people are doing. Because, they're going to take the hit if there's cholera starts running through the community.
Yeah, that's true.
You'd
be like, I don't want anybody monitoring me, but in the meantime, if you don't, you could have a nasty disease rip through.
But if it's within the community, it will be a lot more acceptable than, feds coming in going, "Did you wash your hands?" No, it's
fair enough.
Auntie saying, this is a lot more important than it was when we had a house to live in, because we have all these people, and educating kids specific to their age groups. But, older kids can set a good example. Parents need to set a good example. That's the best way to educate them. And there you go. I mean, there's just so much to hygiene. But hopefully the other thing, dealing with, I know you were talking about dealing with lots of excrement. Those things go hand in hand, because cholera is and Hep A and all of those different things that can come from it. So, that's why the hygiene is so important.
Since you went there, let's talk about it.
Let's go there. Talk about excrement. Yeah. That was a top thing on my list to do today. But, can the community that's hosting this group of people provide the sufficient number of porta potties, the ability to clean them, having hand washing stations, providing sufficient amounts of toilet paper. That's kind of important.
I know, like, in our community, there's a lot of septic systems. Like, we don't have a city waste disposal,
Yeah.
right? So say, something happened and our community welcomed in refugees, like, say to the community church in the area.
Right.
We brought in refugees as a community church. So all their excrement, if they just used the church facilities, would probably overload that septic system pretty darn fast, right? And then if your service to take it away isn't functional, I see that as a huge problem.
Yeah. Well, one thing I learned, we had a training mission in Ukraine with the California Air National Guard. It was a NATO partnership for peace program. We went out and taught them start triage and some stuff. But we were out at this former Soviet air base, which in and of itself was weird being there.
Right.
A few Americans that were ever there. But their idea of a porta potty was a structure in a hole. And that wasn't unusual in that country, that porta potty's in a hole. And you have to squat over it and take care of your business. And I guess when it fills up, they just cover it. And I know for a disaster team, we have to bring our own shovel because we may be in an area where there aren't porta potties, at least initially, and we have to dig our own little latrines. And the guys would go out and dig these trenches, and when the trenches filled up, they would put dirt on them and build a new one somewhere else, assuming you have the land to do that. But that
you can put
works.
Like lye on it too.
Exactly. Yeah. They have ways of decontaminating it. Or if there are porta potties, making sure that there's the ability to clean them. Like you said, the church toilet.
Right, because that doesn't do you any good if you can't empty the porta potty. Those things just get nasty. I'd rather have a hole. A lot of times I'd rather have a hole anyway than a porta potty.
Well, we make our own holes, and that works.
Right.
It's simple and it works, and people take care of when it gets too full. You just throw some dirt on it, some lye in it, and build another one. So that's again, assuming you have the land. Setting. Exactly, you have to have the land to do that. If they're in a more urban area, good luck. That creates a whole second set of problems. But
so city area. Man, I just I'm struggling with what would they do? Like, could you? Oh God, like have a room or something? I mean, that'd be horrible. You couldn't just have a room where everybody's crapping and everybody's going potty in there. That's
no. Yeah, in an urban setting, they'd have to. I mean, again, I think in terms of this country, they will find porta potties. There are lots of them. And they would provide them because the community doesn't want to deal with disease outbreak, certainly.
Right.
But like you said,
if it was long term, like could you go down the manhole or whatever? Just open up the manhole and everybody's going over that. I don't know.
Who knows, or go in directly in the sewer system. Open the manhole and let it go. That's actually something I hadn't thought about, but it kind of makes sense.
I'm thinking like, where is it in the ground that you could get rid of it, kind of thing.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So urban communities really need to be thinking about it ahead of time.
Oh,
for sure.
Yeah. But most of them are. Like a good example is CAL FIRE. Those people have it so well down. We actually, through the state, have a wildland support medical team. And when you go on a wildfire, first of all, CAL FIRE is the absolute best and using ICS and all of that kind of thing. But within an hour, they will take a fairground and have a functional city set up. They have all these vendors that are pre-placed. They have big, huge trailers that are individual showers. They have all the porta potties. They have the tent set up. They have the food area set up. I mean, they have it down. So it is really easy to create something like that if you have the resources set up ahead of time. And like I said, they have their vendor list. The state just calls these people and say, okay, we need you. It's not something they have to research at the time. So this is where planning really pays off. And that's such a good example of, best case scenario.
Okay, so now we have our waste taken care of. Everybody's food, they got water. So now you have all these people just kind of sitting around, right? So a lot of people ask me in my book, why did I create the water line in Without Land? There's a water line. Everybody works on the water line, literally bucketing water from the lake to the facility where it's cleaned, right? Why did I put it in there? Well, I put it in there because these people have been in this refugee camp. Some of them, my main characters have been there 8 years. What do you do, right? What do you do with your time?
I really like that question. Because anything that they can make a contribution to their, let's say, their own little community is going to help morale a whole lot. So just what we were talking about, creating latrines, creating, the dump area, if you will, maintaining those. Yeah. If they're in an area where they can grow crops, if they're going to be there long term, that's huge. Maintaining those crops and planting them but all of those, that would be huge. How people, they have community agriculture plots, that kind of thing. It's resilience. It's them taking care of themselves, and that has a lot to do with morale. Perhaps
right, and finding a way to earn your food, your stuff, so that you feel like you're being useful.
Exactly, and perhaps this is a situation that's long term again. Maybe the community can take some of the men and use them as day labor somewhere else. Maybe different companies can, provide jobs for them. I mean, there's all kinds of options, but it is so important to find something for these people to do, especially those things that help them maintain their own community. That just makes such a big difference in terms of morale and psychological well-being.
I'm so glad that you said that, because the community, because that's basically where I go with it, is there's so many refugees in my book land that the landowners, the people who still have land, they start adopting basically refugee families, and putting them to work on their property to make food to give back to the refugee communities, right? So that's a mixed bag of bolts, how it goes. But yeah, you're in that disaster relief occupation, and it's a thought that crossed your mind right there. And I was
absolutely.
like,
But, and that benefits everybody, so maybe these farmers or whatever it is, they now have workers that really appreciate there. They don't have to pay a lot of money for them, but then these people are getting enough money to feed their families. I mean, it's a win-win for everybody. Mm-hmm. And like I said, it really helps the morale of the whole camp. And there's so much.
I wanted to go into that.
Yeah, there's so much can be done within the camp. Maybe there's women that sew and they can fix clothing. I mean, everybody has their own individual talents that can provide for the whole community. And then everybody's happier and you have less issues. But there's kind of like post-disaster specifically, kind of three different phases of that. First of all, it's coping with the disaster itself and trying to figure out, okay, what the hell do we do now? And then there's recovering. The idea, and this is what, disaster resources do, is try to get them at least back to their prior level of prosperity and development. And of course, that was hard in Haiti because there wasn't much there to begin with, but they did their best. Yeah. And then transforming, saying, okay, we're going to rebuild this, but we're going to rebuild it better. And so that's kind of the thing. But, talking about this group I mentioned earlier, one of the comments they made is when they weren't busy with food preparation and distribution and so forth, they played with the kids. They'd interact with them and play and dance and as they put it, bringing a little light into their dark worlds. And, of course, that lifted the spirits of the parents to see their kids acting like kids. I really think about 1986. I lived in Whittier, which is in Southern California. And it's a small town, but it's bordered by foothills. And we had a pretty significant earthquake there. And unfortunately, all of uptown was like unreinforced masonry, and a lot of that went down. Well, we ended up having shelters and I was working for Red Cross at the time. We had to put shelters in high school gyms and that kind of thing. Well, unfortunately, it was right after the Mexico City earthquake, and a lot of those immigrants had come up to escape that and ended up in a city where there's another earthquake.
Oh.
And they were so
no.
fearful of even being in. I was a shelter manager for this one school, and they were so afraid of even going into the building that they were just laying outside in the grass. So that was kind of a thing.
Because they were scared of the next earthquake.
Right. And I was working for a fire department at the time. And, I was telling the guys, God, these kids are just so scared and they have nothing. They have to leave everything behind. And then they've got this other thing about leaving one earthquake area and ending up in another and another. So the next shift, I came into work, and we worked in a city that was all industrial. They make everything in that city. The guys had a bag that was probably 7 feet tall, full of toys. And after hearing me talk about it, what they had done was they went out to all the toy manufacturers in the city, of which there were many, and said, hey, you know what, here's the situation. And these people just loaded them up, and I went, oh, my God, I get chills now thinking about it. This is the best thing ever. So I hauled this huge bag of toys to the shelter, and oh, my God, these kids ran to me, and they're like,
that's awesome.
For the first time ever, I saw a smile on their face. I said, okay, guys, this is what we're going to do. If you want a toy, you have to write a thank you letter to the fire department and the people that provided these for you. Huge difference. Just having a toy to cuddle with and something to call their own made such a huge difference in their morale. And I'll always remember that because it just made such a huge difference. Local officials, the local community. Cool. Oh, it was awesome. One of the most awesome things I think I was ever.
Yeah, what a memory to have. Yeah,
yes, and,
really
and
cool.
Fortunately, I worked for a good department that worked for a good city, and they made that contribution. But, local officials, local community, as I say, kind of visualize it as hosting this refugee community or whatever it is. Stay in touch with them. Listen to their needs. Listen to their concerns. See what you can do about it. Maybe even having mental health professionals that can interact with them to help with that. The old adage, you can give somebody a fish for a day, but if you teach them to fish, kind of thing. So.
Yep, they'll eat forever.
Exactly. Can they fish? Can they grow a garden? Can you give them the resources to do that on their own? And like we said earlier, that really helps them with their morale. What about schooling? If they're there for a while, there's just so many people out there that want to volunteer their time, that volunteer teachers would go in and work with these kids. So not only keeps them busy, but they're not going to lose too much schooling along the way until they get back, into a permanent domicile. Yeah, and all of that provides resilience for that small community. So those are all kind of things I thought about. That really would make a difference, any of them. I mean, like I said, just the simple act of giving a child a toy, to see the look on their faces. Oh, my God. That was so awesome.
That sounds really cool.
And this was back.
What a game changer.
Oh, my God. And this was back before cell phones, so I couldn't snap a picture of it, but just trying to explain to my firefighters, what a difference that made. It was just so awesome. So those are all kinds of things that can help. And anything you could do can provide resilience for that community. So what
I was going to bring up there. So what about medical? I know this is right up your alley.
Yes,
How are we taking care of medical needs for this group?
Well, I tell you, within our DMAT, they are, of course, the kinds of people that want to help. And so when we're not as a federal team, but they have, probably 5 or 6 different teams within our team, some of which are religious organizations or other NGOs, and they go to Haiti. I mean, they were going to Haiti a couple times a year prior to the earthquake there, because it's the only medical care these particular people got. They would walk 100 miles out of the mountains to come that 1 or 2 times a year to get medical care. And San Salvador. I mean, there's all of these different teams that go to these different countries. And, you know, thinking back to sanitation and water, one of these particular groups does things like create safe water issues. I mean, they I don't know what to say, dig wells or what it is they do, but they do more than just medical care. But I'm thinking...
Yeah, depending on where you're at, whatever the solution is. I mean, because we have lots of options, right?
Right. So what would naturally happen in this country is what we do, our disaster medical assistance team. And, of course, there's the National Disaster System has surgical teams, they have nursing teams, they have all of these other sub-teams, the DMOR, care of the dead, I mean, all of these. But we go in, like I said, we can go in an area with no water, no food, no electricity, nothing, and create our tent city and be functional for 72 hours, you know, to take care of our own people, plus our entire, I mean, we can build a hospital in a couple hours. And it's fully staffed with pharmacology and everything you would find in an ER. So that would be, you know, in this country, if the disaster is of that magnitude where a state would call in the feds, that's what would happen within about 72 hours. Is that going to be there forever? No. And, right. You know, we provide our own security and that kind of thing. So that would be a first step. But there are NGOs that have non-governmental organizations that have similar kinds of things that could then go out there and take over, you know, with that kind of thing. There's a lot of resources.
So like fill the void after like the federal's done helping, then they would come in and be like, okay, we need to set this up as a more permanent thing. Okay.
Right, because the feds can only stay out there so long. You know, because
we
these
can only
people
fund it for so long.
Well, yeah, there's that. And the fact that all of these people are leaving their jobs and their homes, and we can go on a deployment, it's not unusual. 3 weeks is not unusual. But that's taking a big hunk away from your family and your job, and you kind of stretch the limits there. So these other agencies, you know, now they're fresh. And, you know, DMAT's, you know, like Ground Zero, we were there for a long time, but they would switch the DMATs out every couple of weeks and refresh teams in, you know, for a number of reasons. So we got tired of breathing that air. Thank you very much. But those are great options. And like I said, there are a lot of people who want to help, and they have these teams already set up. And they will, I'm thinking of some of the ones we've interviewed on our podcast, you know, Trek Medic. One medic created this team that is now international, that just goes in and helps people, not only, not medical so much, but teaches them the kind of resilience they need, gives them communication, sets up ambulance type, if they have no infrastructure, you know, very little healthcare infrastructure, just all kinds of...
That's what I was, that's where I was going to make you stretch to a little bit next was, okay, now imagine that we have the multiple disaster scenario again. You know, can they deploy that many teams to be helping that many people all at once? How would that kind of work? And like you said before, bringing as many people as you can into a bigger area helps, because then you don't have to build as many of them. But would that, you know, would that, how far, I mean, would the supplies, things like that, well, you know, is that something that's even possible for us to do?
Yeah. The feds really have this figured out, and there's many, God, I can't remember the exact number, I want to say 60 DMATs. And DMATs can have, I mean, they're downsizing the size of the teams, but most teams have 100 plus members. They won't send them all, of course, but this actually happened during the hurricanes last year, one after another. Right. I mean, I was deployed 3 times, even though I was on a specialized team. A whole DMAT may not go out for that long for that reason. But if I remember correctly, every single DMAT in the country was deployed at some point. And they do have to switch them out every once in a while. But there's other things we do. Besides setting up our own tent city, speaking of, public health infrastructure, we can go into, and that actually happened, that was that, I lose track after a while, but there was a hospital that was functional, but I think it's in the South somewhere, I got to think about that. But the amount of people coming in and out of it, they didn't have the staffing. So
right.
what we would do was set up our tents kind of as a triage area outside, and they would come to us first. And as well, the coolest thing ever was to see this ER, go in there and you see people in hospital scrubs alongside our federal uniforms, nurses working together with nurses. And it was awesome. I made some great friendships in that process. So
that makes sense. So you can even go to the existing facilities and just provide extra support.
Right, and what we would do is we would triage these people, and if it was a first aid thing or a mental health thing that we could fix right then and there, they didn't have to go into the ER. For the ones that did, we would have our folks come and get them and take them in, and it really helped the flow going through the ER, because the people that needed to be there were there, and just not everybody. That was Hurricane Sandy, now that I remember it. Okay, I knew it would come to me. Okay. Yeah, and so you know how huge that storm was. So there's a lot of different options that EMAT could do. And like I said, these NGOs would come in behind us, and they'd stay for a long time if they needed to.
And even if it was like the larger city got hit, so you're out in a smaller community, you can find those local, a lot of, rapid care facilities, things like that.
Right, yeah.
So have a lot of equipment there, but they couldn't handle that many people, so you could actually use that facility and then assist.
Right, and you get a lot of, I remember a couple different events where you get these Doc in the Box folks that said, hey, we'll send everybody out to help, just as volunteers, or they supply equipment or, bandaging supplies or whatever. So there's always folks within the community, even if they're not part of in fact, sometimes the volunteers kind of, going back to Carol, everybody wanted to help. They had so many volunteers showing up there. There was no means of even confirming if they were medical. I mean, people were posed as doctors. So after that, the state had to set up a system by which they could vet people, and then they would know if they sent them out that they were legit.
Yeah, because you can't just be overrun by volunteers. That's fair enough. Yeah.
But there's usually
that just creates more problem, and then people aren't getting help, and
big time. And who's going to manage these people? You don't have resources to take care of the evacuees, much less handle 1,000 volunteers that just showed up on the doorstep. As well-meaning as they may be, so they made some improvements in that. Anyway, that's kind of what I say. Some version of a DMAT style medical of some kind.
So my last question for you has to deal with moral civility. So like with Katrina, everybody went into the stadium, right? And then there was more crime inside of the stadium than there was outside. That's a major worry, right? So I mean, what kind of steps are they taking to, kind of curb that, that kind of situation?
It was my team in the Superdome when it all went to hell.
Okay.
That singular event caused some PTSD. It caused some people to want to leave the team. We didn't know what we were getting into. We didn't know. Well, there's just so many pieces to that, but there were way too many people. There was no air conditioning. There was no facilities. They had these these large lamps they would use when they were suturing or something, but they were so hot, they only turned them on when they were actually needing that light. And at night, it was like completely dark. And you're right. Every bad thing you heard happened there actually did happen there. Think about the fact you have psych patients.
And you weren't allowed to leave, right?
Well,
Is that true? Like the people in couldn't leave?
Well, it was surrounded by water. Our team had to go,
okay.
When the levees broke, our team had to go through water. In fact, the first teams that were there had their trucks basically on the ground level of the Superdome, and they water. So they lost a lot of their supplies and equipment. When my team came in, they had to wade through water to get the stuff in there. So and these are folks that couldn't leave because they didn't have transportation anyway.
Right.
So that was part of the problem. They couldn't go anywhere. Plus, you couldn't get up on the freeways. In fact, it was a strange story that when the team was going in, somebody was pushing this lady on some manner of conveyance who was a patient in rather sad condition up the freeway on-ramp. And they stopped and treated her and got a helicopter to come in and take her. And that's a part of a much longer, interesting story. But, do people have arms? Probably. We had the National Guard in there helping out, but they were sorely outnumbered. You're going to have people that just like causing problems.
You just have your element.
Yeah, and to be completely honest, you hear about rapes and assaults and murders. Those things happen.
Mm-hmm.
Now you've got psych patients off their meds. You've also got kind of that group hysteria going on, that mob mentality that might be going on. Mm-hmm. So the team was so sorely outnumbered. And even though we were under FEMA at the time, and even though they appreciated the medical care, what about food? What about water? I mean, you're FEMA. It's like, well, they don't do that part. And they're doing the best they can, it's better to evacuate these people to a better place than to try to bring resources into it. So they started airlifting people from the roof of the Superdome. But strangely, and there was one situation where somebody got shot and one of our guys was going off in a helicopter with them, and they were taking fire from the roof. Hello, people. We're here to help you. And shooting at us.
Oh, no.
So they left. All of the helicopters had to leave. Really?
So they're kind of sealing their own fate at that point.
Pretty much. And and the thing is, most of the residents were not like that. But you're always going to have that element. Right. So, again, going back to the idea of having the community support the community, get some of those folks within that community that may be ex-cops or security of some level, put them into service. And it goes back again to saying, the more these people have to do, the more useful they're going to feel. Have them police themselves where we don't have the resources to do that. Train them, provide something to them where they can help head off some of these problems. But, talk about moral civility. It just, did these people have it going in? I don't know. But it seems to go out the window when they're mad. Where's my food? Where's my water?
Right, yeah. And it's the broken glass effect. So once you kind of slip one ethic, then you push another one, then you put, now we're all out the window. Let's just go for it, right? It can easily escalate to that point.
Well,
you think people are really nice and civil, and then it can unravel real quickly.
Well, and unfortunately, the team finally had to pull out. It just was not safe for them. And it was the hardest decision our commander ever had to make, because he knew, they were delivering babies, they were hydrating people who may not survive without it. I mean, there was just, I had dehydration and that kind of thing, and they had to pull up and leave. And it was really hard on them psychologically. They felt responsible for these people at that point. But, he had to look out for the welfare of the team, and the fact it was just, he said, I just knew that the lid was going to blow off this. And there just wasn't enough security. So I think the idea of in community to police themselves is really helpful.
Yeah.
Give them some tools. Give them a job. Police your own.
Because at the end of every topic that we've talked about, it's like, have your community ready. Have your community ready. Have your community ready. And so I know I've personally tried to raise community awareness and get more people involved. And a lot of people don't want to think about it at all. They don't even want to think about it. So that's such a challenge to bring together a community effort when most people are like, oh, wow, why would we waste our time on that? Because it's never going to happen to us anyway. And you're like, yeah, but if it does, then we're in this hole, when we could avoid it all. Oh, no, it's cool. I don't want to spend money on that.
Yeah. There are communities that don't want to spend money on preparedness because it's never going to happen here. Okay. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, look at what the weather's doing in the world today. It's hinky.
And like I always tell people, you have insurance, right? You buy insurance for your house, right?
Yeah.
Well, why do you do that? Why do you buy insurance for your house? Because one day it might burn down or it might be catastrophically lost. Well, guess what? Your house, you're going to be monetary replaced for that thing, but what about everything else, Like, hello?
Yeah. Well, I tell you, New Orleans has done a lot in terms of looking at the future and looking at another potential hurricane like this, and looking at those problems and solving those problems. One of the interviews we did that was fascinating was we interviewed the person in charge of EMS at the time for New Orleans. And she said there is no worse feeling in the world when your entire public health infrastructure evaporates. It's gone. There's no hospitals. Yes. There's no pre-hospital care. There's nothing. And all we could do was go to the feds and say, please help us. You have no idea what we're dealing with. So they have really stood up and looked at contingency plans for that. And everybody talks about, a couple of years before Katrina, some people made issue of the fact that it wouldn't withstand an F4, F5, whatever. That's in the past. All you can do is look back now and build better levees and train people differently and look for other places for evacuees to go. And I think New Orleans has done a pretty stellar job of solving a lot of those problems. And fortunately, other states and areas have looked at what they've done and are adapting some of those, plans. So, something good always comes out of something bad somewhere, Like you said, even with your kid, he's built some resilience to, I've actually had to evacuate. I have my own go bag. I know what it is to do. I've had to go potty in a latrine, in a hole in the ground.
Yeah, now I know why Mommy gave me this bag.
Exactly.
By the time we have to leave. Yep.
Yeah, but he's made a positive out
instead of,
where so many kids can be traumatized. He gained a good perspective and feels good about himself because now he understands that he can tell other kids, hey, maybe you should have one of these bags. So, that took a negative and made it into a positive. So, good for you.
That's very true. Yeah, I'm just, my big goal right now is to try and, the prepper community, of course, they're very receptive to hearing, we're going to be ready for it. But then how do you get those people who are just not, just chugging through every day, looking at their cell phones, I don't really want to look at that. I don't really want to deal with that. And then when you get them to just stop for a minute and just think about it for a second, they go, oh yeah. Yeah, why didn't I ever think about that before?
You got to grab them.
Right?
You got to grab them maybe right after some kind of minor event just to open their eyes. I mean, how many people have disaster kits but don't think about checking them until the tornado warning is out?
Right, and then everything's expired.
I was in my basement looking in my kit. Well, a lot of these people don't even have kits. They don't know where to go in their house.
Yeah.
All I can say is it's unfortunate they're making their own bed. And what's going to happen? They're going to go to the people in the community like you guys that they know, hey, I know that they have extra food, and I know they know what to do, and I know they have communications, and. So they're all going to converge on your house instead of preparing themselves.
Which is not going to work out well.
Not going to work out well. No, not in the long term.
You can't take care of everybody.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, you can't save everyone.
I mean, if you have a huge garden and a lot of chickens or something that you're willing to share, but they can't do that in the long term. You got a lot of extra tomatoes and fine, give them out, but it's a finite.
But it can't be a long-term situation,
exactly.
Right? Eventually, they have to start taking care of themselves again.
We have to find a way to get them to listen to this podcast. in my podcast.
Right? Exactly. Be ready, folks. That's so important.
Yeah.
So
that's always the message.
Alrighty,
I have
Sam.
to hear it. So there you go.
Right? It's like, come on. Well, and that's why I tried to really do that with my fiction books.
Yeah.
Because I thought, oh, here's a cool like romance adventure story, and while you're reading it, you're gonna be like, what would I do
exactly
if I was in this situation, right? So yeah, that was kind of my take on it.
Well,
so
the third book in my series actually has them on a disaster deployment. So I kind of like trying to send that same message. What
same
happens?
Message, yeah. Such cool.
They go in as an NGO medical team, and it just gets people thinking. Well, could that happen here? Well, what would I do?
Well, why don't you go ahead? We'll wrap it up. Why don't you go ahead and talk about your books a little bit? And you're gonna have to send me a link so that I can put that up with the podcast and let everybody know about it.
Yeah, it's kind of into my career as a paramedic, and the first book's called Partners Out of Phoenix, and it's about 3 firefighter paramedics working together. One of them has kind of serious psychological issues, post PTSD. There's 2 males and a female, and the strong friendship that develops and the relationship that eventually develops. So it's got its romance piece of it, but it also shows some of the real world issues that firefighter EMS people have to face and what they see in their careers. And I wanted people to get a real understanding, and they don't sit in their Barca loungers all day and watch TV and what these people tend to think. There's a lot to their world, a lot to their jobs, a lot of stress that people may not understand. And then, this couple goes on, he eventually goes to medical school, and then run into more adventures, and they get involved in this disaster team. So I'm actually on book 5 at the moment. But if you find the first book on Amazon, you can find the others. I'm about ready to post book 4. But, I've had fun writing it. It actually started as a kind of journal of some of my experiences going back to when I was an EMT, and I thought, wow, I really want to capture this. Well, maybe this would be cool if it was fictionalized. So that's kind of how it all started. So
that's super cool.
And the characters are actually composites of people I actually knew and worked with, and even a little bit of myself. So it's kind of
right. That's how my books are.
And I'd love for your folks to read them and maybe give me some feedback on them or some reviews. That would be good. So there you go. But
that's what every author needs: more reviews. We can never have enough reviews.
It's so important to authors to get the feedback from folks so they know, well, I could redo this, I could make it better, or I could write something a little different, or
or man, those people are just crazy.
Or just knowing, well, there's that, but just knowing that there was something. I mean, when we hear from our podcast listeners, we got one the other day. We get a lot of doctors listening to our podcast who run in the morning and said, God, this one, was saying, God, on my commute, this keeps my sanity by having something like this to listen to. It's like, oh my God, I'm so glad we could preserve your sanity, because we're all freaking crazy. By the way, that's the disasterpodcast.com. And we also have a Facebook site if you search Disaster Podcast. Just a lot of, we're halfway through year 5, and we've not run out of topics. We have a couple of meteorologists that are, we love to death, that tell us about the weather every week, and just some awesome guests. Of course, when we have last year with the hurricanes, our readership just went crazy, because the only people left were our tech guy, in Maryland, and our weather guy, because Dr. Joe, and he's with you, SAR, and myself were both deployed. So they were, getting updates from the field on what we were doing, and people seemed to love that. It was like, you're hearing it first here.
Yeah, the insider edition.
Exactly. So they felt special that they were getting this information first, from our podcast. But, we just had so many really awesome people, and there's a book.
Yeah, I really enjoyed coming on to your show. It was a good time.
Well, and we have Dr. Seth Hawkins created a wilderness EMS book, and it's got such really up-to-date information. We've been interviewing some of the authors and their specific chapters from snake bites and pharmacology, just all kinds of different things he has in there. And these people have been so awesome. So, it's just been a lot of fun. I hope it never ends. Cool. And, there's a lot of synergy between this one and yours and the Prepper podcast. And that's a lot of fun. So I'll be talking.
Yeah, so the best thing about podcasting is the network. I mean, meeting so many cool, really great friends and cool people, and that is the best thing about podcasting for sure.
Well, and we connected with the Prepper community. We really did, which I'm sure you're aware of, we did an actual live training, which was kind of the first kind we called Preppermen, which I don't know if we're going to keep that name, but it was so much fun.
Yeah, it was black belt testing that weekend. I was tested for my second degree black belt that weekend. I couldn't make it out.
We learned as much from them as they learned from us. It was just an awesome, because there was so much good information to share that was different. We had our meteorologist there, and we talked about ham radio communications and just all kinds of good stuff. And everybody had a different set of experiences, so it is always good to share that information.
Yep, and different reasons why, right? Everybody has their own reason why they're doing it.
Exactly.
And it all works together.
And coming on people's podcasts and sharing.
Yep.
That's good. We'll have you back on ours before long.
All right, Sam. Well, we are going to have to wrap it up there, even though I fear that we could talk all day long.
We could.
So I'm going to have to trim a little bit, but that is awesome and was a great show. I'm so thankful that you came on to do this one, because it's exactly kind of the information that I was looking for, and really appreciate your time.
It's always fun, Sarah. Appreciate it. Look forward to doing it again.
Thanks, Sam, so much for coming on the show today. We had a really long interview, but it was a really, really good one, worth taking some notes. And actually, you don't even have to take those notes. Just head on over to my website, and you can go ahead and check out all of the podcast pages, which are just loaded with great information. So head on over there, check that out at author.sarahfhathaway.com. And don't forget to head on over to www.patreon.com/Changing Earth and become a supporter of the Changing Earth podcast. Thanks so much for your time today. I hope you guys all enjoyed the show. And until next time, remember, dream, survive, thrive.
Thank you for joining Sarah for this episode of the Changing Earth podcast. Don't forget to pick up your copy of Day After Disaster, Without Land, The Walls of Freedom, and Battle for the South at www.author.sarahfhathaway.com. If you love Sarah's books and this podcast, please head over to Amazon or iTunes and let everyone know by leaving a review.